welcome again to Public Perspective. And if you're like me, or like most of us, you probably don't think much about plumbing or what happens to water, where you get it from and where it goes to after you're through with it. So tonight, to help us understand some of that, we have the newly elected president of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, Ms. Mariyana Spyropolous. Mariyana, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I think it's my third time on here. So
yes, you're a veteran now.
It's
right?
an honor to be here.
Well, for those who, like most people, have no idea what the Metropolitan Water Rec Department does, why don't we start there and explain a little bit about the purpose and the function.
Okay. Well, you're absolutely right. A lot of times people say, is the Water Reclamation District drinking water, when in fact we are the other end of that process. We do two things at our agency. We treat wastewater and we manage stormwater. And we treat wastewater through 7 filtration plants throughout Cook County. We're a countywide agency. And we manage stormwater through the Deep Tunnel Project, as well as the Stormwater Management Ordinance.
So stormwater is a hot topic nowadays because as climate seems to be changing, the weather patterns are changing with it, and we're getting torrential storms. So we get more water at one time and less water overall. So storm management is pretty important nowadays, isn't it?
Absolutely. You're right about a climate change. A few years ago, climate change was just sort of some trendy word that people were talking about, and now I think it's generally accepted that it's something that we should be concerned about, something that we should make policy towards trying to manage in some way for future generations, just in terms of what will be available to them and in terms of our natural resources and being good stewards of what we have. Stormwater is something that I think we used to consider waste in the past because in terms of, we were talking about plumbing before, the sewer systems are generally combined sewer systems, which has your wastewater and your stormwater together in one system. But now, just in terms of trying to be better stewards of water, I think it's better to separate those systems and use stormwater as a resource instead of as a waste product.
So do we have the infrastructure currently to be able to do that, to divide it out from the get-go?
Well, some communities are already set up that way. Not all of them. City of Chicago is certainly not set up that way, but it's a very old system. And to replace it at this time would be probably a little challenging in terms of price as well as disruption of the system. But newer communities definitely set up their system so that it's separated and so that they can harness that rainwater and they can use it for irrigation, they can use it for water landscaping purposes and things like that.
Now, would the stormwater go through the standard filtration process, or is it a different process altogether from what wastewater would do?
Well, in our system, the combined sewer system, it does go through that. So just to sort of give you a quick run through, you have your homes or your businesses hooked up to the local sewer system. That then is connected to an interceptor, which is where we come into play. And all of that coming from your dishwasher, your washing machine, your shower, your sink, your toilet, all of that will come and be directed to our treatment plant. Depending on where in the county you live, geographically, it'll be sent to that location and it'll be cleaned, and then it comes out of the plant and it's called effluent, and it goes into the Mississippi River down to the Gulf of Mexico.
Now, I always thought effluent was kind of a bad word, but it's not. That's after it's been cleaned up, right?
Correct.
So when water comes in, the newer communities that have this separated, they've built this separate infrastructure for rainwater or stormwater and wastewater. But those communities still feed this general infrastructure that we're talking about, right?
Yes.
Right. So at some point, when those can be separated out countywide, is that when we will be able to treat them differently?
In terms of the newer communities?
Well, you mentioned that I think you mentioned, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, that everything comes into these collectors. Did I get that right?
Interceptors.
Interceptors.
Right.
And so I would think even the newer communities at some point interface to the general county system.
Right.
Correct? So do the newer communities have the ability to siphon off that rainwater, the stormwater, before it gets to the interceptor or before it comes into the overall county system?
So their sewer system is set up so that it separates the stormwater from the wastewater.
And then it stays in their community,
right.
The stormwater.
Correct.
Okay. So each of those communities has to build their own water system essentially to deal
Yeah,
with
so
that, right?
ideally, if you created a new community, you'd want to set it up to have a separate sewer system. But like I said, because a lot of the systems are very old, I think there had been a study in the 1970s to look at Chicago land area to see if they could separate the systems and see how much that would cost. And at that time, it was about $60 billion.
In the 1970s.
Correct. So you can just imagine. I'm not sure if that has
Yeah.
been done again since then.
Probably
but,
not.
it's, I'm sure at some point we'll be looking at possibly doing that and how it would be approached, but I'm not aware of any study at this point.
Now, if we think back about the city of Chicago, the sewer system there was built, was it 100 years ago, or in some places maybe older than that?
At least, because our agency was created in the 1880s. And it was because Chicago was putting its waste in the Chicago River. Chicago River was running east into Lake Michigan, the source of everyone's drinking water, and people were getting sick. Dysentery, cholera, etc. So the state legislature created our agency in 1880, and one of the first things we did was reverse the flow of the river. So
A major
although
engineering feat.
it was, in 1900 that took place. Although Chicago was still putting its waste in the river, it was now running west instead of east. That caused some problems. And then in the 1920s and 30s, we built our filtration plants because the population was growing, and to address that and the needs that were taking place, we had to direct the waste to various treatment plants, and it was much better than throwing it into the river.
Well, the people who were getting it from the Mississippi, right? Because eventually the water went back to the Mississippi.
Right.
So
Like
we were
St.
just-
Louis,
yes,
etc.
moving the problem to somewhere else rather than actually handling
Right.
the problem, right?
But in the 1920s and 30s, they started cleaning it up. So, but like you said, in 1900, to reverse the flow of the river was an incredible feat. People from all over the world were sort of fascinated by this activity. I mean, if you think about the manpower and the type of equipment that they had back then, I think it's pretty impressive. And it basically contributed to the growth of the Chicago area, the Chicagoland area. I mean, you were maintaining the integrity of Lake Michigan. That was an attraction for a lot of people to come to the area. You can't live without water, so it's an incredible source of water there, as well as barge traffic for commerce. So that really contributed to the growth of the community, I think.
So the city built its own, the sewer system for the city, they own that, right? So at what point does the city interface with the water rec district?
Well, that whole system is hooked up to our system. So in terms of drinking water, which was your first question about drinking water versus wastewater, Chicago controls the Jardine treatment plant, which is at Navy Pier. That's our drinking water. But all of the sewer systems are connected to our system through the interceptors, which is what we talked about earlier, and they send all of everything that comes out of the various pipes to our system.
So how are we going to replace all this aging infrastructure over time? I mean, at some point, it's going to give way, right?
Well, you're right about that. We and the city of Chicago are doing it in various segments. I know that the mayor of Chicago has invested heavily in upgrading infrastructure, and we are doing that on a constant basis. So I'm one of the commissioners on a board of 9. Although I've been elected president, I do work with 8 other colleagues on the board, and we set the policy. And as part of that policy, we are making sure that we have state-of-the-art machinery, as well as the whole sort of process and system working to its utmost use. Something that we're looking at now is resource recovery. So although we're maintaining sort of the mission that we have, which is treating wastewater and managing stormwater, within that treatment of wastewater, there's a lot of resources that we could take out. And so what we're looking at is capturing methane gas from the process of cleaning the solids and liquids that go through the process. You can capture the methane gas and convert it into electricity. Our goal is to become 100% energy neutral within 8 years.
Within
We're-
8 years?
Yes, we're
That
already.
seems very
It was
ambitious.
a 10-year plan. We're already 2 years into the plan, and we're on track.
So you would, to be energy neutral, explain what that is. Would you produce enough energy to run all of your operations without
Correct.
bringing in any outside source?
That's our hope.
That would be impressive.
I think so, and
Yeah.
we're a pretty impressive agency, if I do say myself.
And actually, just to digress
Sure.
for a moment, most people, I think, have no idea. You're also a very large agency, and certainly in
Yes.
terms of budget, your budget is about equal to the city of Chicago, is it not?
We're a $1.6 billion agency,
Or at least that's the size of the county, the rest of the county budget.
and
right?
we have 2,000 employees, and we have 7 filtration plants throughout the county. And one thing I wanted to mention is if any of your viewers are interested in a tour of one of our plants, or if you're interested
I'd love it.
in coming with some of your television crew, we'd be happy to have you. I can help arrange all that. Just go to our website, mwrd.org, and we can help with that. There's community groups, nature groups, schools. 7th grade and above are welcome to come to the plants. Probably not now in February, but when it gets a little warmer, it's very interesting tour.
And I
it's
think
very
the last time I
educational.
did that probably was about 7th grade. So I
Okay.
think things have probably changed.
You're
since I
due
was
for a
last there.
visit, for
I
sure.
think so.
Okay.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the board. There are 9 board members.
Correct.
And I know how other boards work. I myself serve on a board of education.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there's always disagreements. There's people who have different opinions about things. But on the Water Reclamation District, I would think everyone has the same intention, right? Everyone feels that, look, we have to handle the wastewater properly. That's, as you say, water is life, and so we have to deal with this effectively.
Right.
But what kind of differences, philosophical differences arise on the board? What kinds of policy questions? What might be one side versus the other? How does that happen there on that board?
Well, like I said, we have 9 board members, and we are all elected countywide. We're not by district. Although Cook County or other county boards are represented by districts, the nature of what we do is a little difficult to make it by district. We're treating wastewater countywide.
For everyone.
So it's difficult to sort of siphon it off to various areas.
And really, my water needs are not different from yours, right?
Correct. But each commissioner brings an interesting perspective and education and background, and it adds to a very interesting mix of people. Everyone, brings that perspective to the board in their decision-making process. But we have a pretty harmonious board. We're able to work together. I mean, obviously, people are going to have differing opinions, but at the end of the day, we're all looking to make sure that taxpayers' money is being used properly, as well as natural resources, that we're being good stewards of our natural resources, as well as looking to the future and how what we do can affect what's happening in years to come.
So what are some of the major issues you're looking at now,
Well,
aside from energy neutrality?
Well, as I was mentioning before, the resource recovery. So not only are we going to get energy from our process, we're also looking to capture phosphorus. And the reason for that is the level of phosphorus in the world is decreasing, and we can get that from our solids. And we have an arrangement with a company called Ostara. They will be taking our phosphorus and converting it to fertilizer. The other thing is we are...
And you get paid for that, right? They
Yes.
come and pay you a fee.
Yes,
right?
and if we can generate funding from that, we can reduce the amount of money that we need from taxpayers. So everybody's property taxes in Cook County has a line item that contributes to the Water Reclamation District and our activities. We are also looking at disinfection of the effluent that comes out of our Northside plant as well as our Calumet plant. And it'll be done by UV rays at the Northside plant, and disinfection will be done by chlorination, dechlorination process at Calumet plant.
Now, why would you do it differently, the two plants? Is one method better than the other, or are they about equal?
They're both valid methods of approaching it, but the reason being is that the UV approach is much more expensive, and the volume of outflow from our Calumet plant is much higher. Therefore, to save money, we're doing the chlorination, dechlorination method for Calumet that has the higher outflow, and we'll do the UV rays on the north side plant, which has a lower flow,
What's the advantage
to be
of
more cost effective.
What's the advantage of UV? Why use it at all?
It does, for the quality of what we're doing in the North Branch, for the waterway there, it makes more sense to, in terms of aquatic life, et cetera, to do the UV rays for that area. But another thing that we're looking at is possibly reusing the effluent that we have for various other things. So, for example, you have computer companies that need cooling, and they usually use water. And they use a lot of water, but it doesn't have to be the water that we drink. It could be effluent from our plants.
Now, would it still have to be treated? Would it have to be disinfected, or but
well,
a chlorine treatment,
it
for
could
example?
be. It has to be cleaned in terms of the effluent level. But the UV rays and the chlorination level, that is for swimming.
And it
That's a
wouldn't-
much higher level
it would not
under
need
the
to meet
Clean
that.
Water Act.
Yeah, so it wouldn't have to be at that standard.
It would not have to be at that, correct. So those are the various things that we're looking at. We're trying to look at resource recovery. It's sort of like a shift in the way that you think and that you approach it, rather than just looking at, well, we're treating wastewater, managing stormwater, and sort of leaving it that way. We're trying to see what can we do to be smarter about what we're working on. We have biosolids. That's a polite way of saying the solids that come through our process. And
You don't have to go into detail about that, by the way.
I'll spare you that. I'll spare the
Okay.
viewers that as well. But the solids we can convert to fertilizer as well. So, for example, I'm sure you and your viewers have purchased Milorganite at Home Depot.
I haven't, but maybe
Or
someday I
someone you
might.
know that
Right.
has, and you can use it for gardening. And we are working with the state legislature to get our biosolids to the grade that the EPA requires in order to sell it as well, to use it for landscaping and for gardening, et cetera. We're going to have a never-ending supply of it, and we might as well, try to be cost-effective in terms of what we can do. Another way of using our resources, as well as reducing the, the burden on the taxpayer.
I'm fascinated by that because, it makes me think in terms of, oddly enough, there's a connection here, space travel. If you were in a spaceship, everything would have to be recycled like this, right? You can't flush things out into space because then they're gone and you can't reuse them. So it seems that what you're talking about is kind of approaching that sort of idea that, look, why waste anything? Why refer to anything? Why even think about things as waste?
Correct.
They theoretically could all be resources.
Right. I mean, we're not at the level of, let's say, California, that is dealing with drought and a lot of challenges in terms of their water supply. We are very lucky to be near 20% of the world's fresh water in our backyard in Lake Michigan. But we need to be proactive and forward-thinking in terms of how we're using our resources, and these are just a few steps that sort of incorporate in that. You were asking me also what else we're working on. We're talking about the increase in intensity of storms. And instead of building more pipes to capture that water, we're now looking at green infrastructure. So green infrastructure is sort of a toolbox of various things. It means a rain barrel, a green roof, permeable pavement.
What's a green roof?
So a green roof would be a garden on your building, on your house, on your office, on any kind of structure where you're going to capture water up there to reduce the amount of water that's going to go on your pavement. About 40% of Cook County has now become impermeable pavement. So what
40% of the land area.
Correct. So that water has to go somewhere. It's now concrete and asphalt and various other things that don't absorb the water. We need to find a way for that water to be absorbed somewhere. So instead of it jamming into the local system where you've got that water competing, if you ever see your street sort of flooded,
Oh, yes.
all that water is competing to get into the pipe system. Why not try to capture some of that water at the front end through green infrastructure? So we have a system where we're working with various municipalities for a rain barrel distribution to work with the mayors and every other local official to get rain barrels out there to get people to incorporate them, use them at schools, so that people understand that, you know, there's other options for them.
Now, in fact, we have a rain barrel in our backyard.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Yes, and we use it for watering plants, of course. That's the obvious use for it.
Right.
But it's about, I think, 30 gallons,
Okay.
maybe 40, which is plenty for us to make use of it. But if we think about the amount of rainfall that comes down, even if everyone on our block got a 30 or 40 or 55-gallon rain barrel, that's not that much capture of rain. So is it really enough to make a significant difference, even if everybody in the county got one?
So you make a good point. Studies have been done that show about 50% of your neighborhood has to be on board with some kind of green infrastructure. So that can start at the top in terms of the administrative buildings, the schools. They can incorporate those types of tools in one way or another.
Like a green roof or any of these, anything
Correct.
from the toolbox.
But
right?
it's not enough for your neighbor just to have a rain barrel, and that's going to solve the flooding in the neighborhood. You're right. You have to have a lot of those components throughout the neighborhood. And I'm confident that people are starting to accept that, and they actually are seeking that out to help them in terms of playing a role in reducing the flooding in their area or reducing the water impact on their communities.
So how closely do you work with the local municipalities? And I raise this because, you know, there's an election coming up, and in various towns the candidates are sparring against each other, saying, well, you're not doing the right things about flooding, and the other guy turns and says, well, it's nature's way of, you know, what can you do about it? It's God's will, or whatever.
Right.
So does the Water Rec reach out to these communities and say, you know, really there is a lot you can do about this flooding, and here's our toolbox?
Absolutely. We have to work with the local communities. It's not a problem that can be solved either by us alone or by the local community. It's something that we have to work on together. Like I was mentioning before, your home is connected to the local sewer system, and then the process then comes to, you know, our plant. So within that process, there's a lot of things that we can do with the local community in order to help them. So we definitely reach out to them, and it's not just the green infrastructure. That's just one part of it. We're also working on the stormwater management ordinance, helping communities implement that. And what that means is, if you're going to build let's say you're going to build an apartment building and you're going to use a square footage of concrete, because you're taking away that square footage of permeable surface, you're going to have to build a detention retention area to hold water to compensate for that.
And that's under the legislation that's being
Correct.
proposed, right?
So now let's say you put a green roof. You'll get credit, and your detention area can be smaller because you're going to get a credit for that. So it's another way of having people use green infrastructure. It's another way of people sort of being conscious of, you know, this is part of an ordinance now. So you have to incorporate this. It's not an optional thing. It's not something that sounds nice. It's something that's necessary for the community to function and to be ready for the future.
And that's something that could be passed by the county board, for example, right? When you mentioned an ordinance, it would not have to go down to Springfield to become statewide legislation.
We passed the ordinance, so it applies to Cook County.
Oh, it's already passed, I'm sorry.
Correct.
I'm sure you said that, but it's already passed.
Yes.
So as individuals, now I know, in fact, my wife and I have had this conversation. You know, our driveway was built in 1947, I think. And so it's getting old, but it's concrete ribbons and there's grass in the middle.
Okay.
And so we've talked about it, and I said, gee, it'd be nice to just pave the whole thing, and like it'd be a lot easier. And my wife, being apparently more environmentally conscious than I am, has pointed out to me that, well, no, we need the green space.
So
And
she's a very smart woman.
Yes, she is, in fact, that. And even that, I mean, so the driveway, that part of it is probably about 30 feet or so of grass that would be gone if we were to pave it over with a driveway that was not ribbons, but that was the full width of concrete.
So it would probably be easier for you if you had it all covered, but you've got the grass, and so you're doing your part by having that for water absorption. So.
Right, and so in newer communities, are those kinds of ordinances, or if not ordinances or local ordinances, are there at least guidelines where if a new community is being built, that they would build ribbon driveways, for example, rather than paved solidly across? Is that something that you guys work on?
No, because we leave that to the local community.
Okay.
But we know that when we work with them, that they require certain water absorption ratios in their community to contribute that. So they may not be building the ribbon driveways. That sounds like something maybe from the 40s or something.
Well, that's when our house was built, was the
Okay.
40s, right? Just post-war, right?
But for newer developments, they're definitely requiring that, like I said, that type of ratio where you're requiring the homeowner or the developer to have a certain ratio of absorption or detention area.
And that makes sense because people are endlessly creative. So if you just set the objective and let them figure out how to get there,
right,
you find some very creative solutions.
And that's the beauty of it. There is, like I was saying before, we metaphorically talk about it, the toolbox, but there's a lot of different components that people can use to be creative about that.
So you've just become president.
Yes.
So what would you need to see to consider your presidency a successful term?
Well, some of the things that I'm looking at are more outreach by the Water Reclamation District. I'm working on setting up town hall meetings geographically throughout Cook County. I think that's something that's important. We oftentimes, after heavy rains, are asked to come out to talk to a community, and I would like to set that up before these rains begin. We might be able to help people look at certain things that they may not have thought of before to be ready for these rains when they do come. Climatologists and scientists have looked at the numbers. They see that the rains are becoming more intense. There's heavy rainstorms. If you get 1 inch of rain, it's about 15 billion gallons throughout Cook County. And it can really impact local systems because you're getting it very quickly and very intensely for a short period of time. And that's when it backs up into the streets, and if it has nowhere to go, sometimes it goes into people's basements, unfortunately. So we're going to, work with, like I said, work with the communities, but also go out and talk to people and let them know, and hear what their concerns are and let them know what we can do for them.
So I'm curious, and this may be an area that you yourself may not even be familiar with, but vegetation has to change if different climates require, they spur different vegetation. So if we are moving to a climate era when we have short, intense rainstorms and not overall rainfall may drop, even though the intensity of the storms may be much higher, is that something that we as a community or society need to look at, that we need to start thinking about? Maybe the nice green lawn isn't the right way. Maybe there's some other way to plant different things that would help this situation. Is that something we should think about?
Well, as part of the water absorption component, certainly there are certain trees, there are certain shrubs, there are certain plants that are better at water absorption than others. I know that the city of Chicago, as well as other communities, allow for a rebate when when a homeowner uses those shrubs, then they are able to get a rebate from the community because they've used those. So, people should think twice when they're going to cut down a tree or get rid of a bush or something like that. That could be a key component for, solving or the solution for water absorption.
Nice and simple solution. And with that, we're already out of time.
Wow, that went by really fast, but it was fun.
Well, it just means we're going to have to get you back again. Now that you're a veteran,
anytime.
We'll do
it's
it again.
It's a pleasure. Thank
Mariyana,
you.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us again on Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott. You can find us every Saturday night at 8 on Comcast Channel 19 and on the web at publicperspective.tv. So till next time, thank you and good night.